Hello, everyone. This is Jamie Flinchbaugh, host of the People Solve Problem podcast. I'm here with Art Byrne. Art, how you doing?
I'm fine, thanks, Jamie. How are you? Nice to be with you.
Yep, I'm doing great. Excited about this conversation. So many in the lean community will know your name. It's been out there and really famous for being the retired CEO of the Wiremold Company. A significant story of lean success. You've introduced lean to over 30 companies from the position of CEO. So you have a lot of credibility from being on the front lines of making it happen. Certainly a noted lean author and spokesperson. And here, I kind of have the opportunity to introduce a new book you have, the Lean Turnaround Answer Book, which is a pretty cool title. I always look at titles to say, how curious do I get about the content? So I think that does it for me. Maybe just tell us a little bit about the purpose of the book and how it came about.
Okay. Well, let's start with how it came about. I've been doing lean for basically 40 years, since the beginning of 1982. Learned a lot over that time period. And as I went along, one of the ways that we learn in lean is by visiting other companies, having other people help you, et cetera, et cetera. So I've always felt the obligation to kind of give back and try and help other companies go down this path. So about 12 years ago, I wrote my first book called The Lean Turnaround. And that was really aimed at sort of CEOs and upper management to explain lean and explain, what it was about and the fact that it would work in any industry. I had examples in the hospitals. I had examples in insurance companies and distributors and things like that, plus the examples I had from Danaher and Wiremold, et cetera. That became a pretty popular book, actually. It's continued to be pretty popular even now. The response I got from that was, gee, this is great. We really like this, Art, but how do you really do this stuff? Because you can explain the theory and stuff, but people want to know, how do I do this? So that created the second book, which is called The Lean Turnaround Action Guide. And that won a Shingo Prize, actually, for being kind of unique. And it's basically a case study. It's really like a business case study where we took a company and we showed you the forecast as a traditional company over 5 years, and everything was going pretty well. And then we took you step by step through the lean conversion of that company. There was a lot of dialogue. We could talk back and forth to the employees. We created a management team, and we tried to address all the issues that normally come up in a lean conversion, so that all those issues were part of the book, and they were coming up from the employees and from the management, and we had to address those. We had 3 chapters just on Kaizen, different kinds of Kaizen, flow Kaizen, setup reduction Kaizen, and office Kaizen, just so we could take people through the detail of how do you actually run a Kaizen and what's involved in it, et cetera, et cetera. So that book was very successful. And of course, those 2 books created a lot of questions coming to me about lean. And I was very lucky that the Lean Enterprise Institute, or LEI, gave me a space on their lean post, which they have every week. They have a lean post.
Yep.
So for the past over 8 years or so, I've been kind of writing a monthly article answering some question that somebody asked me on lean. And over time, I've written 100 of those articles for the LEI Lean Post. And I said, but these articles stretch over a long period of time. So you might read 1 or 2, but you don't get the whole sense of these. So I thought, why not just put them together in a book where people can get all the answers on lean that are pretty common. So we've cut it down to like 70 of the articles and combine that into the Lean Answer Book. So the title is exactly correct. These are answers to lean questions that I've had over the years. And quite honestly, they're the most popular questions that people have about lean. So somebody that has this book, if you think about someone starting out in lean, they're going to have a lot of questions. What about this? What about that? What about management? And how do you incentivize people? There's all kinds of questions. They can find an answer to every one of those questions in this book. Mm-hmm. There's also companies that start down the lean path and then they kind of stall out. They got some gains and then started drifting back the other way, and they want to restart their lean effort. They have different kinds of questions. And the answers to those questions are also in this book. So I think it's really like a reference book in a lot of ways. I mean, if you read the whole book, you're going to learn a whole lot about lean and what to do and what not to do. And I think it would give anybody that reads the whole thing a tremendous grounding in lean and how to run how to make the lean turnaround happen.
Yeah.
But even if you got bored and didn't want to read the whole thing, just having it as a reference book, when something comes up, you can just go into the index and say, oh, here's the question that I have. I'll go to that article and I can read that article. So that's really how it came about and what the book is all about. And the whole thrust of all three books is how do I help people get better? How do I help people run their companies better? Because in my opinion, we've talked about lean a lot and always in the wrong way. I would say like 95% of the people who start down the lean path, they do so as a cost reduction. They think it's a cost reduction program, right?
Right.
And as we say on the cover of this book, lean is the best strategic way to run any business.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter what the business is. If you run it from the lean principles and lean approach, you're going to be better than any other method you can use to run that business.
Right.
And I think if we can get that message out to people that this is what lean is really all about, is how do you run your business better, right? It's not a set of tools. It's not a cost reduction program. It's not some manufacturing thing. It's a strategic way to run your business better than the competition. And so that's what this book will help you do.
That's great. I love just the idea of starting with questions. Back when I used to write a column for Industry Week, anytime I was stuck for an idea, I'd have a client asking me a tough question, and I'm like, well, I'll sit down and write about that. And, that'll be the column. So I didn't do it as systematically as you did, but I love the spirit behind it. So with the idea of, the lean turnaround and taking people through the journey, obviously, you hit some walls along the way. And, I always say those are the moments where you really, really win by breaking through those challenges. So I wonder if you could share, an example of a particularly difficult problem that you've had to solve in your past and how you approached it.
Well, they've all been difficult, Jamie. But when you just mentioned the name problem, it's difficult. Every problem is difficult. I'll just give you I think a fun example. When I first went to Wiremold, and I walked out on the shop floor pretty early, and Wiremold had a lot of different types of equipment, and some of which I've never seen. We had a lot of rolling mills, for example, because we made raceway for buildings for electrical conduit and stuff. And so I went out on the floor and I see one of the rolling mills, and I said, well, how long does it take to change over this machine? And of course, the operators and the managers that were with me, they said, it's about 14 hours. This is a tough machine. It takes 14 hours. And so I looked at them all and I just said, well, no, that's no good. We got to get this under 10 minutes. So now, right away, of course, they say, well, wait a minute. How do we get this guy for our new CEO? He obviously doesn't know anything. We just told him it takes 14 hours. And his response is, no, it needs to be under 10 minutes. So, of course, the problem there is, how do you go from 14 hours to under 10 minutes? What are you going to do? Now, I could have gone back to my office and said, no, I want you to get it under 10 minutes, and I'll, keep me posted. Let me know, right? And, of course, as you know, if I did that, nothing would happen. It would have stayed at 14 hours till today. But we didn't do that. We said, we're going to help this team get it under 10 minutes. And so we started our first Kaizen. We did it with cardboard boxes, and we laid it out and laid the whole thing out. And then we did another Kaizen and another Kaizen. The machine was pretty busy. We couldn't, just, stop and go do whatever we wanted. We could only get at it on weekends and holidays and that sort of thing. And we had to make some alterations to this machine. Nothing big and nothing really expensive, but we had to alter a few things. And anyway, 18 months later, we could change this machine in 6 minutes. Okay. So now we went from 14 hours to 6 minutes. Well, that's nice. But the real key was, how do the employees respond? How do you get buy-in? How do you get, so, I mean, they went from, gee, who is this idiot? Well, gee, that was interesting. What's his next stupid idea going to be like, right? But along the way, I think one of the key things, the key takeaways from this, and I've always found this in business, if you can challenge a team to do something that they're convinced cannot be done, they said it's 14 hours. They believe it's 14 hours. If you can convince them, if you can challenge them, and then show them how to get from 14 hours to 6 minutes, they're so happy because they in the end they did it. I didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
They did it, and they are just off the charts happy and amazed about what they accomplished. And that gives you a lot of buy-in, and I thought that's a good example for you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic example, and it really, there's knock-on effects from solving problems, and you demonstrate that really well. In that there was a cultural lift, a morale lift,
Right.
that came from the solution. It wasn't just the performance gain you got from doing that.
So the cultural part was more important than the performance gain.
Right. Yeah, it certainly pays you off many other ways as you go forward. So, as a CEO, you kind of get to decide your role in a lot of cases, how you want to fit into a particular problem. Do you want to own it? Do you want to sponsor it? Do you want to coach it? Do you want to just encourage it? How do you decide your role? How do you think about your role in problems in your organization?
Well, I think of them again from the lean perspective, which is, lean needs to be led. You don't manage lean; you have to lead it, and that means my role all the time is the basic lean zealot, the advocate all the time. So I have to own everything. I own every problem. I own every attempted solution to the problem. I have to be the one who organizes the approach, who pushes everybody to get better, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess in the end, I would say that I'd be first of all the owner, and secondly, in my particular case, because no one, for example, at Wiremold had much experience with lean, I was also the leading coach and the guy who pushed this stuff. Even when I wasn't on a team, I led a lot of teams myself. But when I wasn't on one, I would always sit into the daily meetings and make sure that I had some say in everything and challenged everybody. Well, what did you think about this? Did you think about that? Can't we do this? Those kind of things. So I would just say, if you're going to make drastic change like we do with lean, the CEO has to lead it, has to be the lean zealot. Because if you think about it, lean is nothing but a series of leaps of faith, right? Because every time you're going to move machines and create a new cell or do something like that, there's always somebody in the crowd that in the back of the mind is, well, what if this doesn't work? These machines have been in the same place for 15 years, and you want to just go and grab them and run around and make a cell. And what if the thing doesn't work? What if it happens that the machine doesn't work? Somebody has to be the owner of that. Someone has to say, no, just go do it. And because if not, there'll always be somebody that raises their hand and says, well, what if it doesn't work? And that'll stop everything, right? It's the same of looking at a problem and saying, all right, we're really excited. We got a solution to this problem. And someone will say, but what about when this happens, right? And then when you look at that, what they're talking about is something that happens 2% of the time. 98% of the time, the solution that the team came up with will work just fine. Mm-hmm. But someone puts their hand up and says, but what about when this happens? That happens 2% of the time. And yet everything stops. Nothing goes forward because someone says that. So I see the CEO or the leader has to be the one to push through that and make sure that, hey, let's address what goes on 98% of the time. We'll figure the 2% when it comes around, because it only shows up once a year, and we can figure that out. Let's not let the 98% stay in a terrible state when we know we can make it better.
Yeah,
I think the leader has to be the one who has the key role in that and who takes the leap of faith and makes sure that everything happens.
Yeah. Do you find with you taking that ownership and that accountability on, it gives people more license to lean in and take some risks because you have their back?
Absolutely. And that's really how the culture changes over time. I had another example early on in Wiremold. We were doing a Kaizen, and of course, these Kaizens lasted well into the night. So one night, about 8:30, 9 o'clock, I'm walking around the plant, and a couple of guys come up to me and said, Art, we the cell you want to create, we're having a really hard time because the rolling mill that you want to put in that cell, and before the rolling mills were all in a separate rolling mill department, so I want to put them into a cell. Because the rolling mill's too big, and the only way we can fit it is if we can cut a hole in the wall. And I just looked at them and I said, oh, okay, go ahead.
Right.
And they looked at me like I was from outer space, and they said, really? You just like that? You're going to let us cut a hole in the wall? I said, yeah, well, you guys are working on it. You're the ones that come up with the layout. So go ahead, And so that made a big change in a couple of those people. And it made a big change to a lot of other people who heard the story. And my finance guy came up to me after that and he said, Art, what did you do to Lance? And I said, Lance? Who's Lance? They said, Lance is one of the guys who came up and wanted to cut the hole in the wall. And I said, oh, yeah, I didn't do anything to Lance. I just told him to cut a hole in the wall. And I said, why? And he said, well, he's been one of the biggest problems and complainers and stuff that we have. And now he's a completely changed guy.
Mm-hmm.
Lance wound up running our employee association, planning the Christmas parties for the whole factory, all this kind of stuff. I mean, completely changed because I let him cut a hole in the wall.
Right. I love that because it's, so many of the constraints, I argue sort of some part of sponsorship is removing artificial constraints that people imagine are there because nobody told them they weren't there. And
Right.
It's a great story, example of removing constraints from people that they've self-imposed or history has imposed on them. So last topic I'd like to cover with you is really just around learning. How is learning a part of problem solving? How does problem solving tie to learning? How are those are they the same thing? Or are they different things? How do they fit together?
Well, I think they fit together perfectly when you're doing lean and Kaizen kinds of things, right? I mean, just before we get into that too much, I mean, think about the attitude of the big three U.S. automotive companies over many, many years, right? And their main mantra was never stop the line, right? That was it. And we're seeing an example of that right now with Boeing, unfortunately. But they always said never stop the line. And along comes Toyota, and they said stop the line. They have end-on cords, and they gave the hourly employees working on the line the right to stop that line.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever they stopped it, people would rush in and figure out the problem, solve the problem, and then the line would start again. So there were lots of stops in the line. That's still true today. 60 years later, Toyota still stops the line. So what happens when you stop the line? Well, a couple of things that are really important happen. One, you solve problems, and those problems get solved permanently because all the conditions under which they occurred were there when you looked at the problem, right? But the more important thing was learning occurs, and so as you stop the line, you're getting better quality and lower costs and solving problems. But the real thing you're getting is learning. You're creating a learning organization of how to learn to solve problems, right? And the same is true, in my mind, with the way we ran Kaizens all the time, which is, we wanted everybody to be on a Kaizen, number one. We picked people always to be a team leader or a co-leader, because that was a learning thing for them. We forced them into that in a way, and that some of them were a little shy and didn't want to be the leader, but you were amazed at how people, that you didn't expect turned out to be fantastic leaders when you put them in that role. And then the other thing was we made sure that on a Kaizen team, half of the people were hourly employees and half were salaried. So it wasn't just a bunch of salaried people doing something, right? I mean, if you think about the way that Six Sigma and solutions like that work, they get a team of salaried people that they train, and they come in and do a lot of studying and statistics, and then they impose upon the hourly people their solution.
Mm-hmm.
If you do a Kaizen and the people that are really coming up with the best ideas are the hourly people working on the job in the first place, you don't have that. you get a lot of learning, you get a lot of things coming from the people who really understand what's going on, and you get a lot of buy-in from the rest of the organization, right? Mm-hmm. So I think by problem solving like that, you really get a lot of learning. And just think about how do traditional companies solve problems? They'll create a team, probably mostly salaried people, and they'll give them a problem, and they'll say, okay, the team will get together once a week and start to look at this problem. We'll study it, we'll analyze it. And then, once a week they get together, but some people can't show up every week because they were busy or something, and the whole thing drags on. Maybe 2 months later, they come up with some sort of solution. But now, before they're allowed to move anything or do anything, they're going to get management's approval. That takes them another month. And so what they did after the first couple of months was they didn't do anything. They came up with a plan that needed to be approved by somebody. Now, with a Kaizen, it's a doing operation. It's doing, not studying and not planning. And so from Monday to Friday, we've moved machines, we've changed things, we've altered things, and we have something that's working by the end of the week with tremendous gains that occur along the way. And so by the time the traditional company meets for its second meeting, we've already got a whole new solution. We've cut costs by half. We've reduced the space by half. We've cut the setup time by 90%, blah, 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 blah. There's a whole list of things that happen. So it's a difference between planning and doing, I think, is really the key. And you get a lot of learning in the doing part.
Yeah. Love that. That's a good note to end on. Make sure people, know that's where the benefit comes from. So go and do. As you go into your problem solving and your Kaizen. So Art, I want to thank you for coming on, for sharing your wisdom, both in the book and here on the podcast, and I wish you all the best.
All right, Jamie, thank you very much for having me. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the People Solve Problems podcast. Let's keep the conversation going. Visit jflinch.com for more episodes and other content. And continue to join us on your podcast app, of course. We greatly appreciate your feedback through reviews and ratings. Consider expanding your understanding of problem solving with Jamie's book, People Solve Problems: The Power of Every Person, Every Day, Every Problem. Available on Amazon. Until next time, keep learning, innovating, and solving problems.